ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं। शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरम्। Hari Om, salutations to all. So last class we saw mind is the flow of thoughts, and it is the flow of thoughts that generates this entity called the mind. It is not just merely thoughts, it is this flow. Like the water, merely if it exists, it is a lake or it is still water. But when it flows, then it is a river. So this flow of thoughts generates a entity called the mind, and hence the law is very simple. Greater is the flow, lesser is the happiness we feel. Slower is the flow, greater is the happiness we feel. So when we are seeking happiness in the world, what is required is to slow down this thought process, so that we can understand that this mind is just like we see the frames, no? The movie is projected at 25 frames per second. That speed of projection shows the illusion of movement and something happening. But if you slow it down, then one understands nothing is happening. When Vedanta says that this world is illusion and we are pure consciousness, right now we are not able to experience that. Why? Because the flow of thoughts is very fast. This flow of thoughts has to reduce. Now, why is the flow of thoughts so fast? So this flow of thoughts has to reduce. When we try to reduce this flow of thoughts, then we are not able to control that flow of thoughts. Even we sit quietly for meditation, the mind starts wandering. So when they analyzed that what is the reason, they found that there are three main reasons. And they are called as the Hridaya Granthi, knots of the heart. Why they are called knots? Because they bind. Human being gets completely, the infinite nature of ours, we shrink into that as though we are one finite limited jiva, and then we are suffering there. So what are these three knots of the heart? Avidya, Kama, Karma. So three knots of the heart: Avidya, Kama and Karma. Now, these three knots of the heart, we have to understand a little more deeply. Some of you have done this. Some of you may be new to it. So, you have to answer this now. When we live in the world, we get results of action. Results of action are called what? Karma phala. What is the cause of that result? Immediate cause. Right now we are only asking immediate cause. What is the immediate cause of the result? Cause of action, not cause of result, not the result of result. Sorrow or happiness is what? Is the result of that result. Immediate cause of a result is action, simple. You have to focus on the whole screen and me, both. Immediate cause of action is what? Immediate cause of desires? Immediate cause of thoughts? Desire. Immediate cause of desire? Vasanas. Now, when we face the result, that result will further strengthen or weaken the vasana. This cycle is called cycle of karma. Right? That vasanas in us are unmanifest tendencies. They manifest as desires in the intellect, thoughts and emotions at the mind, actions at the body level, results at the external level. These results, when I face with my own raga and dvesha, attachment and aversion, they will strengthen the vasana or weaken the vasana. Both. I'm not asking a question. I am saying they will strengthen or weaken. If you come every Monday to Upanishad class, your vasana will be strengthened. 5 classes you don't come, the vasana will become weak. Result will strengthen. Action you did, result you got, result will strengthen or weaken the vasana. This cycle of karma is what is responsible for what? The cycle of birth and death. That every vasana does not manifest in this life. Only certain number of vasanas will manifest. Those vasanas which manifest also, when we experience the fulfillment of that desire, they will create further desires. All those desires don't manifest in this life. But the law is simple. If an action is done, result has to come. If desire is entertained, it has to fructify. So if it is not manifesting in this life, then when it will manifest? Sometime in future. So for that I need new bodies. Hence the cycle of birth and death is dependent on this karma cycle. So this is called kama and karma. When we see in Hridaya Granthi, no, kama and karma. Karma is selfish actions. Kama is selfish desires. What Gurudev used to call ego and egocentric desires. So these ego and egocentric desires is what strengthens the vasanas. What creates vasanas is ego and egocentric actions and desires. So when we go ahead, we will see the solution to that also is to reduce the vasana pressure. How to reduce vasana pressure? Reduce ego and egocentric desires. So now this karma and karma. See, a lot of people know about desire leads to action. Action is the cause of bondage and birth and death. That is known. With little thinking also one will know, one would have read somewhere, one will understand. But deeper than that, one doesn't go. Vasana, at least I didn't know before I came to Vedanta. That what is vasana? In the way in which Vedanta speaks about it, I don't know. People use the word vasana in different contexts. But here vasana means unmanifest tendencies, the impressions which we have collected in our past. How many lives in the past we have collected, which will manifest as desire, thought and action. And which type of desires are the cause of bondage? Selfless, not selfless desires. Selfish desires and selfish actions. So please remember, by itself karma cannot cause bondage. And by itself karma cannot cause liberation also. Karma is the effect. If I am prompted to act selfishly, that action is the effect of what? Selfish thoughts, which is the effect of selfish desires, which is an effect of selfish vasanas. So by itself karma does not bind or liberate. So if I say that I want moksha, I go away from all karma, but selfishness in me has not reduced, will I get liberation? Not possible, because cause is intact. which is what Bhagavan told Arjun, that if you go away from this battlefield, it will not serve your purpose. You will be frustrated. Why? Because the selfishness is not removed. In fact, it will get increased. Here is the opportunity to act selflessly to protect dharma, to do the duty. That you are going to leave and go and sit alone in a forest. That will increase the selfishness. Because you abandon the duty, and not that you are ready for that. Both. Abandoning this and not ready for that, that is the misery. So when we understand this very clearly, that action is not a source of our sorrow. So many people think like that. स्वामी जी, ये सब छोड़ छाड़ के हम चले जाएंगे कहीं. और they tell us also, आप तो धन्य हो गए, इस संसार के मोह माया में आप नहीं फंसे, हम तो चक्की में पिस रहे हैं. Or when they go away to a camp, then they feel like that, how nice, so blissful, 7 days, so wonderful it was. No tension, no family pressure, nobody doing any kit-pit, nothing. Life could be just like that, Let us extend the camp by another 20 days. No. Now what happened to your bliss? Karma asakti is there in all of us because selfishness is very strongly there. So karma doesn't bind. If we think that I will leave all karma and go away, no, karma is not the cause of sorrow. No, I have so many responsibilities, I don't get time to meditate. So karma is a cause of problem. Karma is not a cause of problem. I can meditate even in spite of that, and while doing action also I can take the name of the Lord. So what binds is not karma. The nature of karma binds. Selfish karma will bind. It may be 10 karmas which are selfish. They will bind terribly. Or it may be thousands of karmas. People like Gurudev did incessantly they worked, tirelessly they worked. How much karma? You just imagine, in 42 years to create 300 centers and 70 schools in 25 countries. Imagine what level of karma it is. It's not a joke. He could not sleep enough in the night. Could not sleep, matlab did not sleep in the night. He could sleep how much ever he wanted. But 4-5 hours every night he used to sleep. Early morning, get up, write letters, correspond. And not like today with so much of technology facilities, not so much. It is right hand letters. And create a huge organization. Massive amount of work that is. Compared to that, what is our karma? Think about it. Our life, we are fretting and fuming. Arey bahu, too much of work it is. I am very stressed out. Ask anybody, how are you? Exhausted, fatigued, tired, burnt out. Same. Today's world, it is very common. Why? Because we think that the amount of karma that I am doing, the time that it is taking, so I am getting stressed out. No, what is real cause of stress is selfishness, attachment, insistence. That is the real cause of stress. If I don't have any such insistence, no selfishness, genuinely I am working selflessly, no stress will come. So karma does not bind. Kama also does not bind. By itself, desire will not bind. That insistence that this desire must be fulfilled in this way, at this point in time, and through this desire only I will become happy, that will bind. That's a wrong notion. That without this desire fulfillment I am not happy, that wrong notion is the cause of sorrow by desire. Otherwise, by itself, desire also does not bind. Great masters also have desire. To revive Hindu culture, Gurudev had a desire or not? To integrate the whole country, he had a desire. But how much is I in that? Nothing. To the extent I is there, to that extent stress will be there. No I is there. It wanted genuinely for the selfless purpose. Not that he wants to take a credit, I revived Hindu culture. Then maximum stress. Even in social work, spiritual work, many people want that recognition, then stress will come. So to the extent I feel I need this desire to be happy, to that extent there will be misery. So now what we saw? Action by itself does not bind. Desire by itself also does not bind. Selfish insistence that this desire has to be fulfilled like this only, that will bind. One. And I am not happy till the desire is fulfilled, that will bind. This is the knot of heart really. By itself, karma and karma is not the knot of the heart. Selfishness is the knot of the heart. Ahankar, ego, that is the knot of the heart. Now the question is, from where this selfishness came? In this cycle, is there selfishness? Cause of selfishness anywhere in this? This cycle is actually the effect of selfishness. What makes me have vasana? Or let me ask simpler question. What makes me have desire? Arey, that is the root cause, Baba. Don't jump to that. Incompleteness. Go step by step. Maths problem, we know the answer. This is the solution. Steps are important, no? Otherwise, solution though is there. One will just say this is the solution. But how did one arrive at that? So, desire arises because of incompleteness. When I feel incomplete, then there is a desire. When I don't feel incomplete, no desire at all. When one is in deep sleep, is there any desire? No desire. No sense of incompleteness. When one is completely identified with the work that one is doing, let us say one is playing music, one is lost in music, any desire comes? No. The moment I feel something is lacking, then desire comes. So desire is because of incompleteness. And why do I feel incomplete and when do I feel incomplete? When I identify with the body as me. Please again remember, body, mind, intellect by itself, they are equipment only. They cannot make me feel anything. If I identify with it saying this is me, then the conditions of this body are my conditions. Condition of the mind is my condition. Condition of intellect is my condition. Now, because they are incomplete, I am also incomplete. Body, mind, intellect exists in deep sleep or not? You have a doubt? Pata nahi my body exists or not. I am not aware of it, so I don't know. But you got up in the same place, na? Body exists. My identification is not with it. So body existing or mind and intellect being there, like in the example where I gave absorption in music, mind is there or not? Or mind is zero? Mind is there, but identification is not there. My mind has become fully one with music. So identification is not there, limitation is not there. I'm not thinking of myself as an ego, as an individual. So I don't feel incomplete. So no desire. So what has to be done? BMI doesn't have to be destroyed. My feeling that I am this body, mind, intellect, that is false. That's why it is called false identification with BMI. It's not just identification with BMI. It's a false identification that I think I am this BMI. That's why in Sanskrit is a better word. Dehatma bhav. Deha means this BMI. Atma means I. Small I identify that I am this BMI. The moment I think I am this BMI, incompleteness starts. Then I need vasana, then I need desire, thought, action, then I am extroverted. Now why do I think I am this BMI? Because I don't know who am I. Avidya is the cause. The root cause of sorrow is ignorance. I don't know who am I. That ignorance makes me feel incomplete. When I feel incomplete, desire will rise. And each person, this much is common for each person. Ignorance, false identification, incompleteness is common for all. After that comes the differences. Two people feel incomplete. One person comes to Upanishad class, one person goes to movie. Why? Tendencies are different. So from Vasana onwards, different starts. Now, why Vasanas are different? Because all of us have a buddhi. With the buddhi we have chosen, and through the actions that we have chosen, we have created Vasanas, and those Vasanas have further produced actions. So now these differences start. So avidya leads to kama, kama leads to karma. Now what typically happens in life is, so these are the three cycles. First cycle is called avidya cycle. Avidya, dehatma bhav, apurnata. That is the first cycle. Second cycle is vasana to vasana. That's called karma cycle. Third cycle is birth and death. Birth, life, death, birth, life, death, this cycle. Vedant at least makes us aware there are three cycles, and the root cause of that is the first cycle, which is avidya. Many times we don't even know. So much time it takes to even come to conviction whether there is reincarnation or not. There are so many people who live with that thought only that there is no reincarnation. Only one life. So live however we want. But if one examines properly, of course reincarnation exists. So that cycle of birth and death itself, one doesn't know. Then this cycle of vasana leads to desire, thoughts, action, result, that also one doesn't know. And the cause of both these is avidya, that also one doesn't know. And the best part is one will still question, why do I need spirituality? My life is going on very well. Continue, Baba. Happily continue. The day one feels the limitation of this life in this world and one understands ki, what am I doing here? It's so temporary. Everything is fickle. Nothing remains. You try to hold something, it is gone. Like trying to hold a river in the hand. River is flowing. Put the hand and try to grasp it. Nothing remains in the hand. It's like that. Continuously it is flowing. When I have seen the world enough and I understood that enough, ki bhai, this is all nothing temporary, nothing permanent here. That person says, now what is the main purpose? Why am I here? Kastvam koham kuta ayata kame janani kome tata. Who are you? Who am I? Who is my mother? Who is my father? Meaning, what is my cause? Mother and father there means that. Kame janani kome tata. Who is my mother? Who is my father? Meaning, what is my cause? From where did I come? Iti paribhavaya sarvam asaram. When we think properly, one will understand this is all ephemeral. Vishvam tyaktva swapna vicharam. It is a dream, it's an illusion. Then one comes to Vedanta properly. Now, Upanishad knowledge is to remove the root cause. That is the main purpose of Upanishad. Remember what we came to this from. We came to this from the understanding that mind is a fictitious entity created by flow of thoughts. That flow of thoughts has to be slowed down. The lesser the flow of thoughts, greater will be the capability in the mind to contemplate and to realize myself as happiness. Why are we not able to slow down? Because the cause we are not handling. By mere willpower, if I try to slow down, it may happen for some time. But if I don't cleanse the selfishness in me, then selfish actions don't stop. The selfish actions don't stop because selfish thoughts are there. Selfish thoughts are there because of ultimately ignorance. Till I don't handle this, how will I sit quietly? How will I meditate? How will I realize the truth? So in Vedanta, that's where it is that this Hridaya Granthi has to be cured. How to cure this? Of all these, the grossest in the three, avidya, kama, karma, which is the grossest? Karma is the grossest. To control the gross is simpler or to control the subtle is simpler? Easier to control the gross. So first start at the action level. all those things which are given to us by religion to discipline our life, to bring our life in a certain order so that the selfishness at action level goes. Those are all the values. Humility, straightforwardness, forgiveness, compassion, truth, all those values. Punctuality, all. I'm not joking, it is there. Next week onwards, we'll give you the complete chance to practice. I told you, no, next week onwards, 7 o'clock, this is going to be locked. If there's no lock on this, we'll get some other method to lock it. This thing now, when you turn it, from outside also you can unturn and come in. Oh, there's a lock. From outside they have a key. Very good. Lock it. Then you will have chance to practice. We are refining your action. So what happens? At the action level, if I start following certain discipline, like even a schedule, get up in the morning, do this, do that, first few things, fixed schedule. Then at action level, I am changing. When I start changing at action level, will it not affect my thoughts and vasanas? It will affect. It will change. What they say, if you do 21 days something, it will become a habit. And if you do 90 days, it will become a lifestyle. 21 days. Suppose you take a 21-day challenge. Hashtag 21 days challenge. Take every day morning, I will do 1 mala of japa. Any challenge. Every day morning, I will do yoga. Or every day, I will do morning, evening, any time. I will study 2 pages of the Upanishad every day. Any challenge one can take up. But the idea is at action level, if I change, then the thoughts will also change, desire will also change, vasana will also change. So that is one method. The second method is to come from top. Change the desires, change the thoughts, change the action. Both are required. So Gurudev goes on to explain these aspects, that how one has to change. And in integrating this personality is where he says that there are these 3 very important values, which are the fundamental values of Sanatana Dharma, which are Satyam, Ahimsa and Brahmacharya. In the first class we had done about Satyam. Satyam means what? Intellectual honesty and conviction that what I am convinced by, I will not compromise. That is Satyam. It's a quality of the intellect. It is that conviction only when I start living in my life, then my life transforms. Knowledge transforms into conviction by reflection, and conviction then transforms my whole life. That is Satyam. So if I am convinced of a certain value, getting up early is good, sleeping early is good, I should do that. No, but society today doesn't appreciate that. That is their problem. So whatever I am convinced by, those values I have to uncompromisingly follow. That makes the buddhi steady and strong. If I cannot follow a simple conviction, how will I follow what the scripture is saying, that I am not the body, mind, intellect? That's a deep-rooted idea in the intellect, that I am this jiva. Then when I have to steadily contemplate that I am not the jiva, I am Brahman, it will have no impact. Why? Because my own intellect will say, very good, you are Brahman. You can't get up early morning, you are Brahman. Baat karte ho. My own intellect will insult me. Why? Because I don't have the capability to follow at the basic level, basic instructions. See, a seeker will go through struggle, there is no doubt. Ups and downs are there. But the basic intention is not to live in compromise and to put that effort to live by my convictions. Even 2, 3 values, I commit myself and uncompromisingly live those, then the buddhi becomes sharp. 42 years, Gurudev, unbroken effort to teach the Gita every single evening. Imagine doing something for 42 years every evening. Whichever part of the world he was teaching Gita. That is commitment or not? If you listen to some of his talks, there's a talk on Adi Shankaracharya ji. He gave the talk in Bengaluru. The talk starts by him coughing. And he says, I am not well. And the next line he says is, but a missionary has no excuse. The talk has been fixed. All of you have come. I have to do. And that's it. He starts the talk on Adi Shankaracharya. Started straight. No break. Until he was having some heart failure or some such thing, then operation and all. Otherwise, no break, continuously. Only once it happened like that, where he was called to Jakarta to give a talk. All permissions, everything was given, organizers arranged everything, and then finally what happened? When he landed there, they cancelled the permission. You cannot give a talk. 3 days talks. They cancelled, you can't give a talk. What Gurudev said at that time, he said in last, I don't remember exact number of years what he said, but definitely about 35. He said in the last 35, 40 years, this is my first holiday. Imagine. We work for 10 days and we'll say, I need a break for 20 days. 42 years. First holiday. What level of commitment that is? Because he was convinced that Hindu culture has to be revived, Gita has to go to every doorstep. He goes on sharing the knowledge of the Gita. And he loved the Gita. So, did it. So, one has to be like that. That put the efforts. Ups and downs may be there, but without compromise, when one sticks to that buddhi becomes very strong. Otherwise, our own intellect insults us or not. And that's why in the Gita, Bhagavan says, lift yourself by yourself, do not condemn yourself. How do we condemn ourselves? By compromise, we condemn ourselves. When I know what is wrong, I still land up doing it. I insult my own self. My intelligence only tells me you are a weakling. What will you do? Nothing more you can do in life. Don't talk big things. I don't know if I told you in the last class, but even if I told you again, repeat. If my actions don't follow my convictions and values, my convictions and values will fall to the level of my actions. 10 days I put up an alarm and I say I have to get up every morning at 6 o'clock. Alarm rings at 6 o'clock. I get up, put it off, go back to sleep. 11th day, what will happen? My actions are not following my conviction. 11th day, what will happen? My conviction will come down to level of my action. Where if I set an alarm of 6 o'clock, my mind will say, this is impractical. You cannot get up at 6 o'clock. Don't even attempt it. Meaning you are not an early riser, basically. You get up, aram set 8 o'clock. Now what has happened? My conviction was that getting up early and sleeping early is the best thing to do. That was my conviction. A conviction did not follow my action. So action, when I am continuously doing in the contrary way, my value falls to the level of my action. Which is why Satyam is a very important quality, because I have to lift myself from Jiva Bhav to state of Brahman. For that, Buddhi is the only equipment I have. If Buddhi is not strong, I cannot lift myself. Forget to Brahman level. Anything in the world also I cannot achieve. That intellect which keeps on compromising will not achieve anything great in the world. Gurudev used to call this as self-cancellation of thoughts. Energy will go in self-cancellation of thoughts only. Buddhi will decide that get up early, and when the time to get up early comes, the mind and the body will say, no, you did so much hard work, you need rest. Today, psychologists and all these health people, they say 8 hours minimum we need to sleep. Last night you slept only at 1 o'clock. So till 9 you need to sleep. One part of the buddhi is saying get up, sleep early, get up early. The other part of body and mind is sleeping late, getting up late. So eventually I will settle down. So how will I lift myself? Ordinary things I cannot achieve in this world. How will I lift myself to higher level? Is the solution for this settling down for this notion that I am weak and incapable, or solution for this is push myself up? What is the solution? Generally what we do now, we'll escape from this because this is a pressure. If my intelligence is insulting me all the time, it is a pressure, I don't like it. So I will leave the cause of it, which I think is following some values which are too idealistic. Values are not idealistic. I am attached to comfort, that's all. So I have pulled myself to that level, and now that comfort is making me go down further, not wanting me to struggle. Now you just imagine, instead of pushing myself up using the buddhi, what is happening? Going ulta in the other direction only. That's why Satyam very, very crucial. Uncompromising commitment to what I am convinced by, Satyam. Then the next level is at the mind. What is that? Ahimsa. Ahimsa means non-violence. Can we be 100% non-violent at the body level? Yes or no? No? Non-violence we should follow, na, body level also. Mosquito we have to kill. Jivo jivasya jivanam, Srimad Bhagavatam says. Life subsists on life. Oh, then to happily we can do anything. Kill anybody, eat anything. Why? Life subsists on life. Life may subsist on life, but we have a choice that which form of life I can consume, where I do minimum violence. So at the body level, minimum violence is the law that I need to follow. But at the mind level, ahimsa is not to hurt myself, not to hurt others. Please remember, first ahimsa is not to hurt myself, then not to hurt others. When we say not to hurt myself means when I compromise, then I am hurting myself. Be honest, correct. So be honest with yourself. So don't compromise, don't hurt yourself. Take good care of your emotions also. Don't torture, don't suppress, don't inflict injury, unnecessary. Don't do any of that. I need to love myself also. Ahimsa also means love yourself. But not to that extent that I love only myself. Then that becomes selfishness. Love yourself, love people genuinely. No negative thoughts about people. No, but if they hurt me, then what should I do? Forgive. If required, show righteous anger. If required, be little more assertive. Those things are possible. Nobody is saying don't do it. Mahabharat war shows it. Ramayana war shows it. But don't do out of hatred, out of dvesh. At that moment, one may feel upset also. But one should not allow dvesh to build. Let it go. On that issue, I may express certain things. After that, one lets it go. So ahimsa is mental non-violence. The attitude of not wanting to injure anybody. No revenge, no feeling of hatred, no feeling of aversion. Because the law of life is so simple. When we learn Vedanta, we understand what? Madatma, Sarva Bhutatma. Is it possible to hurt anybody else without hurting myself? It is just not possible. The word dvesha is very good. Why it is called dvesha, Because it is dvi-visha. It is double poison. First poison in my heart, then somebody else. Dvivisha. So mental non-violence. One anecdote of Mullah Nasruddin's life, One day this Mullah Nasruddin is going in the market, and somebody saw that there is something he has tied on his back, and he's covered it and he's going. So they asked him, "Hey Mullah, what are you carrying?" He said, "Shh, don't talk loudly. Come here." "What?" "I'll tell you in your ears, okay? Don't tell anybody." "What?" "This is a bomb." Saying, "This is a bomb. I'm carrying a bomb." So why? Because you know that Salman, when he comes, every day he gives one on my back and he says, "Hi Mullah, how are you?" Today when he hits, his hand will blast. So I'm carrying this for him. How silly it sounds. But that's what I'm doing. Every time I'm thinking, I meet that fellow next time, I'm giving a piece of my mind to him. What does that person think of himself? I'm burning already. Then when I meet him, the best part happens is I may not be able to speak only. Or some situation happens, that person behaves nicely, or something happens, I'm not able to express my anger. Then I come back more disappointed, saying, couldn't say it. How much am I hurting myself all the time? And most important point of mental non-violence is my mind is not free. When dvesha is there or raga is there, both will cause violence. It will not keep the mind free at all. How will I think about Brahman and who am I and Atman and all that? Why? The mind is stuck with what? Raga and dvesh. Continuously the mind is filled with that. The attachment, how will it cause violence? Attachment only is the source of violence. Raga is the source of violence. Did not whole Mahabharata happen because of attachment only? So mental non-violence means invoking love, removing raga and dvesh. So Satyam, I should identify what are the core values that I really value, which I want to live uncompromisingly. 1. 2. Ahimsa. Identified who are the people towards whom I have strong raga and who are the people towards which I have strong dvesh. Same thing can be done with objects also. Which are the objects that I love too much? I am so attached that without them I can't be happy. And which are the things which I hate, which are good for me but I hate? Raga and dvesha. So sadhana is to neutralize this raga and dvesh. How to do it? What I don't like, which is good for me, engage in that. And what I like, but I cannot live without, I am very attached to it, detach from it and see the painful side of it. Then this raga and dvesh will go. And if somebody has hurt me, invoke compassion and forgiveness. Then ahimsa I am practicing. Then the third value is at the body level, and that is brahmacharya. What is the meaning of brahmacharya? To live in moderation in all the sense contacts with the world is the first meaning of brahmacharya. Not to engage in any extremes. That is brahmacharya, first meaning. But don't think this is the only meaning. Many people are very happy with this meaning. I can enjoy, moderation, very good. That is only first meaning. The human being wants license to enjoy. And if that license comes from Vedanta, then Vedanta is saying you can enjoy, World is an illusion also, Vedanta is saying. That is higher level, Swamiji. Right now, brahmacharya. Brahmacharya, why it is that extremes are to be avoided? Because if I suppress, I am violating. If I keep on indulging, also I am harming myself. Both will lead to harm. How will continuous indulgence lead to harm? Because it will dissipate my energies. It will make me more extroverted. It will create more extroverted vasanas. take me opposite to my goal. If I keep on indulging, and if I don't do anything and just suppress everything, then also it is violence against me. Because it is there, it will find and it will erupt as a massive volcano. It will destroy so many things. And the saddest thing is, a suppressed personality is very frustrated. Irritated that person will be. If somebody is irritated, one of the causes may be suppression. One, I'm not saying only cause. One will be suppression, possibly. So the person himself or herself should find out that, am I suppressing anything? The spirituality is not for suppressing at all. Many people think like that spirituality is suppress all desires. Spirituality is rise above all desires. No suppression. Suppression cannot lead to higher states. Meditation and all one cannot do. Hence one has to rise above all that. Go through all it, drop it, no suppression. So moderation is very important. And this moderation is allowed for permitted pleasures which are dharmic. Please remember, don't say I will do moderation. In a week I tell only 10 lies, Swamiji. Moderation. I only give 1 or 2 taplis to people, that's all. Moderation. Earlier I used to give 10, 20, now 1 or 2. Give 1. Moderation is in dharmic things. What is adharmic or what is not good, that I have to just abandon. That is called what? Nishiddha karma. That is prohibited action. That has to be abandoned. Can't say moderation in prohibited action. No. In permitted ones. Now, if I live like that, in all my sense contacts with the world, I live in moderation. Meaning, eat in moderation, sleep in moderation, exercise in moderation, work in moderation. Recreation, enjoyment in moderation, spiritual practice also in moderation. Consistency comes when there is moderation. When there is extremes, there is impulsiveness. Impulsiveness leads to extremes. Moderation brings consistency. Think about it. Every day doing 20 minutes of walk is brahmacharya. Is that better? Or going to the gym one day and walking for 1 hour, cycling for 20 minutes, and then doing some weights for another 40 minutes, and then next 10 days do nothing. Which is better? Every day 20 minutes is better. No? People meditate also like that. One day one will do 5 malas of japa, next 5 days quota has been done in first day. Nothing. No, moderation is required. Moderation brings consistency. Consistency will fuel moderation. Funniest thing is people do that in eating food. आज शाम को वेडिंग में जाना है स्वामी जी, सुबह से कुछ खाया ही नहीं, दबा के खाएंगे शाम को. Stomach is that much only. It is not good. How much one can... So moderation is a very important principle. Now, if I live in moderation, what will happen? Neither suppression nor sublimation. Mind is ready to focus on Brahman. First point. That person who is ready to focus on Brahman, that person, because one has lived Satyam, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, the mind of that person will revel in Brahman now. That is called Brahmacharya. Brahmani charati iti brahmachari. One whose mind revels in Brahman. How did the mind revel in Brahman? Because one had moderate contacts with everything in the world. No suppression, no complete indulgence. That mind is a healthy mind, which has left away all that which is prohibited, which is not good for it. Engage in what is good in a moderate way. Now I am ready to focus on Brahman. Moderately, every day I contemplate this much time on Brahman. Realize the truth. That person is actually a brahmachari. And the word is brahmachari, okay? Not brahmachari. Because many people say, brahmachari ji, aiye. Brahmachari means one whose mind revels in Brahm. Brahmachari means one whose mind revels in Brahman. So Brahmachari, so the real meaning of the word Brahmacharya is not abstinence from married life. Two meanings are moderation, which can apply in married life also. Moderation in married life. And then the mind revels in Brahman. That is a real Brahmachari. Without the first meaning being applied, the second meaning we cannot come to. Now these three values, Satyam, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya, these are to integrate the intellect, mind and the body. Such a mind, intellect, body which is integrated, that person will be able to reduce the thought flow, contemplate on Brahman, realize the truth. That my nature is pure consciousness, is avidya will go away. Please remember, these are all preparations which are required to even understand what the Upanishad will say. That's why Gurudev has given such a long introduction that how to follow all these values. And to help us to follow these three values, each of us have to also identify what is our temperament. So Gurudev gives here that in Hindu culture, in Sanatan Dharma, such beautiful understanding of human personality is there, that all the human beings are classified into 4 categories. What are those 4 categories? One who is extremely dynamic, needs to do lots of action. That person is to follow the path of Karma Yoga. Action-oriented person, can't sit quietly. Second is emotion-oriented person. One who is having much more emotions. See, everybody has all the 3, action, emotion, thoughts, desires, they all have. But predominantly, which is the temperament? So emotion-oriented, for them the path is bhakti. Knowledge and intellect-oriented, that I want to follow the path of knowledge, reflection, logic, analysis, contemplation, Jnana Yoga. And then the 4th one is one who is able to use willpower. With willpower, one can train the body, the prana, the mind, and following that path of Raja Yoga, one realizes the truth. 4 paths. Gurudev has given these 4 parts elaborately here. But remember, the essence of the 4 paths is to reduce the ego and egocentric desires, make the mind quiet. With that quiet mind, contemplate on Brahman, realize the truth. So now we will see Gurudev himself describing these 4 paths through the video. You can focus on just the video.
Now the question is, can we act without ego and egocentric desires? Is it not in all action? I must have the consciousness that I want something. Without these 2, how can I act? When these 2 are not there, I am in deep sleep or under total control of form. No action can spring forth from me. Then how am I to lift myself from the ego and selfish desires and act in the world outside? Any intelligent man round the world at any period of time would say this is impossible. This is not a practical philosophy. It is an utopian dream. It is a solution or a treatment which is more painful than the disease. If the treatment is more painful than disease, it is better to have the disease than the treatment. It is not so. The Rishi said, all of you are right. When you deny this as a path, you are right. Our sympathies are with you. Why? In 99 cases, it is true that nobody can act in the world outside without ego and egocentric desires. Except one exception. In that condition alone, man voluntarily acts without ego and egocentric desire. At the altar of love, you and I act without ego and egocentric desires. I love my mother and I am serving her. She is sick. I am serving her. Not that I may get some money from her or that she has not written the will and therefore I am serving her. No. That very serving her is itself a great joy and fulfillment for me. Not to serve her would have given me agonizing pain, a sense of guilt. So I am working for the sheer joy of doing. The father who loves the child, he may go about in a torn shirt, can't afford another shirt, and yet he will be sending money for his college education. Why? Thus, loving the Lord and acting in the world outside is the method by which the existing vasanas can exhaust. That is why in all scriptures, service of mankind, of the community, the society, as a dedication unto Him, or as a worship of Him, dedicating to the Lord, act on in the world outside. In Gita it is said that thus worshipping me with your karmas, work in the world outside, is the noblest of all worship. Such an individual who does it, he is serving me the best. Now, even though all of us have got BMI, everyone, no exception, yet we are different from each other because some of us are body oriented, some of us are emotion or mind oriented, and some few of us are highly intellectual type, rationally oriented. Mankind falls under these three types. And the fourth type I am not explaining. The fourth type is neither physical, nor mental, nor intellectual. They are personalities below par. We are taking normal, healthy human beings. They fall under these three categories. The body physically oriented, emotionally oriented, intellectually oriented. Naturally, therefore, these three types of people cannot be prescribed with one and the same method, technique. Just as one child of yours is interested in engineering, another in medicine, a third in music, you can't say that, no, all of you learn music. All of them learn engineering. It will never happen. So this wonderful idea, this or the Western religion, semistic religion, it's not true. One way, one God, one scripture. It is wonderful to hear. Good socially, to militant, to make it militant. But from the spiritual standpoint, it is detrimental and suicidal. Each individual must be given his freedom to bloom by himself. It's only because all of us are not of the same similarly oriented personality. To those who are physically oriented, who can never sit quietly, it's a surprising thing that you are all sitting quietly. Man finds it the most difficult to sit quietly. And your notebooks, if you look, you will find that you have never been sitting quietly. What all cartoons you have done on the margin. Hey, you are not an artist. It doesn't mean that you never attended. You attended, but your hand was going on cartooning. Even international conferences, they always supply you with paper and pencil. Not to take down notes, but to see what Kennedy was drawing at the time when the meeting was going on, the cabinet meeting was going on, deciding upon the fighting with the, start the war with the pig. What pig? Bay of Pig. You see, that picture is there in the New York. Go there and see in his exhibition. There is exhibited the backside of a young girl. He was drawing at that time. Not that his mind was there. His mind was in the problem that they are discussing. But his natural vasanas are coming out. You understand? It's natural. And if you don't give the paper and pencil, people would sit there and scratch and spoil the table and the polish. To repolish it is very costly. So to say that every board meeting, they will supply free paper and pencil. So hands cannot keep quiet. School desks, have you seen? Bathroom walls, have you seen? Hey, it's natural. There's nothing immoral about it. So majority of us are body oriented. To them, since they cannot keep quiet, action, the path of work is being prescribed. Do your duties according to the quality of the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, the prescribed duties. Do it without ego and egocentric desires, and worship me with fulfilling your duties. That would be your path. By thus arising above the ego and selfish desires in devotion unto him when you are acting in the world outside, the existing vasanas get exhausted. Or if you are emotional, with a devotion, move towards him in love. And since you are in love, all your actions are dedicated to him, just as you love your family. And therefore all your efforts in your offices or in your marketplace is all meant for me and my family. It becomes natural. The intellectual man, rational man will never do karma yoga, will never be able to really get involved in devotion because he has got a million questions to ask. He is not emotional. So if you say that pray to God, why should I? Who is God? Is he not all-pervading? If he is all-pervading, is he not in my house? If he is in my house, is he not in my bedroom? If it is in the bedroom, he is all-pervading, therefore he must be under the blanket also. Then why should I get up from the blanket and go to a church or a mosque or a temple? Is there more concentration of God there? Less 100 questions he asked. And you and I don't know how to answer. And therefore we say, you are an atheist. It is not. He is the greatest theist. He believes in him. But he is seeking, not in your method, because his instrument is intellectual. He is rationally questioning you. For what? To understand. Very often we misunderstand such people and we condemn them as atheists. They are not. They are seeking him by contradicting you so that some logical reasoning may come from you so that they can satisfy their intellect's quest. That is the path of contemplation, study of the scriptures and contemplation of the higher. By this, that's karma, bhakti, jnana, the path of service, the path of devotion, the path of intellectual contemplation. By these three paths, not that the three paths will take you there. No, the three paths will reduce the vasana. And therefore the vasana pressure upon Amanda is reduced. Amanda's wanderings into the world of OET is curtailed. The mind and intellect, the thoughts in it becomes quiet, alert, vigilant. Quiet, alert, vigilant, the thoughts have a tendency to enter into contemplative mood. The lesser the vasanas, the greater the contemplative mood. And by that process, you awake into the higher state. All these three paths have been discussed exhaustively in the Bhagavad Gita.
Right. So the three paths and the fourth one is the Raja Yoga. As Gurudev said, they all are to reduce the vasana pressure, to slow down this mind and then contemplate on the truth that my nature is pure consciousness. Wake up to that supreme truth. This knowledge is called Brahma Vidya, Atma Jnana. And this knowledge is that which is the core competency of our country. Bharat is known for this knowledge. The number of saints, sages, rishis, mahatmas who have been born here, who have discovered this knowledge and given out this knowledge to the whole world is innumerable. How many great masters? That's why it is said that to be born in Bharat also is a matter of great punya. From world over, even today, people come to this country for what? For this knowledge. And Gurudev wanted this knowledge to be there with the Bharatiyas. We ourselves have lost this knowledge. World is coming here, learning Sanskrit, learning our scriptures, opening our books, reading, and we have forgotten that. So his objective was to bring this knowledge because this is the core of Sanatana Dharma. And even in this knowledge, the direct means of this knowledge is contemplation. So if you read the commentary, in that it is said that Gurudev, when he used to take these talks, every class at the end he would take some time and train people in contemplation, which today we call as meditation. Because that's the key, final key to realize the Supreme is that meditation. As we progress in these sessions also, we will spend last few minutes in learning a few aspects of it so that we can practice. So now this knowledge is what we find is in the Upanishads. So Upanishads are found where? In the last part of the Veda. So it is called Vedanta. Vedasya Antah. Vedanta and Upanishads mean the same. Now, what is there in the beginning part of the Veda? First of all, Veda means what? Literally, Vid means to know. Veda means knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of Jiva, Jagat, Ishwar. Holistic knowledge is Veda. Primary meaning of the word Veda is knowledge. Last class I had spoke about it. The secondary meaning of that is a book. that it was compiled by Vedavyasji, classified into each Veda, classified into Mantra, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Vedas classified into 4 Vedas: Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. That is what he wrote down, because he felt that the memory of people is going to be very weak. Lucky, na? Vedavyasji wrote it down. Otherwise, what will you and I remember? Today, if we have to say 13 into 13, we need calculator. So the point here is that when Vedavyasji understood that, then he wrote it down. But Veda by itself means knowledge. And what knowledge is this? The knowledge of Jiva Jagat Ishvara. And this knowledge is that which is not written, which is not a composition of a human being. It's a revelation revealed to the great minds who were searching the secrets of this universe, of the personality, of the truth. To them, this knowledge is revealed. So Veda is called Apaurusheya. It is not a creation of a human being. You may say, but many other religions also say the same thing. So that is correct only. What is wrong in that? What is a revelation is a revelation. Many scientists will say the same thing or not. Aryabhatta discovered gravity. Newton also discovered gravity. Revelation about gravity happened to both of them in different parts of the world and different time periods also. So it is possible. Revelation can happen. The minds which are tuning up, to them the revelation happens. Did I tell you about Daivarata? No? So you may say that either revelation happening today also. Yes, it is happening. In the 20th century, there was that person called Daivarata. He was an ordinary waiter in a hotel. No background of any great Vedic knowledge and all that. But very pure at heart. And genuinely, selflessly, he would serve. And one point in time in his life, he would sit quietly and mantras will reveal to him. So he did not understand once or twice when it happened, what is this happening? But later on, that started increasing and lots of revelations happened to him. Then he used to say whatever was revealed to him. Then the Pandits used to verify and they say, yes, this is there in this Veda and this is the missing portion of that. So that person was then called as Rishi Daivarata. Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan has published a book also on that. That I'm just giving one example that even in the 20th century, the revelations have happened. So it's not that only in Vedic times it has happened now also. And it must be happening now also to many, many people. We may or may not know so many of them. So it is Apaurushaya, meaning what human being has not written it down. So the limitation of human intellect are not there in it. Selfishness is not there in it. The limitation of human buddhi, the narrow standpoint that human can see only through a limited intellect, that narrowness is not there. It's universal principles. So one is Veda is Apaurushaya, a revelation. That's why it is said in the Upanishad, Yasya Nishvasitam Vedaha, whose breath, Ishvara is described like that. The Vedas are the breath of the Lord. Meaning, we breathe so effortlessly, no? In the same way, this knowledge is the nature of Bhagavan. And it is revealed, effortlessly revealed to the minds which are pure. Yasya Nishvasitam Vedaha. So even Sayanacharya ji and others who have written Bhashya, etc. And here it is, Gurudev has given in his commentary that we find Patanjali in his Bhashya pointing out how Panini has made the distinction between spoken by him, tena proktam, and made by him, tena kritam. What is the difference between written and spoken? What is written is only a revelation. These masters wrote it down. It is not their composition. It is a revelation. Tena proktam. The Lord revealed it to them. Like Gayatri Mantra. Many people think Gayatri Mantra is written down by by Vishwamitra Rishi. After he got an intuitive insight about Gayatri. Mantra as it is with the Sanskrit words revealed to the Rishi as it is. The Rishi is not thinking in his language and writing it down. Like gravity, if we say, Aryabhatta will call it as Akarshana Shakti. In the Surya Siddhanta, the first verse says that. Akarshana Shakti, Gurutva Shakti. And very interesting it is, Shankaracharya ji has mentioned gravity in the Mundakopanishad Bhashya. It is there. In Mahabharata, if you read, in a passing reference, Vedavyas ji has said that tidal waves are caused by the moon. Just imagine. That means they knew gravity existed. Tidal waves caused by the moon, how it will cause? Just like that. The force between moon and earth they know, and what sustains the planets is the gravitational pull, the force. So, to different rishis this has been revealed. So when I gave the example of gravity, now gravity as a force exists, they have put it in their language. This is one example, which they have put in their language. But a mantra which is revealed like a Gayatri mantra or a Om Namah Shivaya or a Mrityunjay mantra, those mantras are revealed as it is verbatim to the Rishi by the Devata of that mantra. So these mantras have a Rishi to whom it is revealed, have a Devata, have a Chanda, they have a Bija and a Kilakam, the seed and the power of that mantra. Every mantra will have. So that's why these are revelations. So Vedic revelations, and hence the Vedic mantras are considered the supreme. Above any composition of any human being, Vedic mantras are considered the supreme. So to chant the Veda also is much more impactful because the vibration, because Veda is also sound vibration. The mantras are sound vibrations. And they have intonations. So when we chant that mantra in the proper intonation, it will create the vibration, it will quieten the mind, it will have a lot of impact. Hence it is a responsibility of all of us to learn the mantra with the intonation. Like Sahana Bhavatu also. It's a Vedic mantra. It's a Shanti mantra, but it's a Vedic mantra. In many Upanishads, it will come. Taittiriya Upanishad, etc. will say Sahana Bhavatu. So how to chant Sahana Bhavatu? With the intonations. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. See the impact of this? Very different, no? Compare it to this. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti. We'll go to sleep only. Instead of becoming alert, what will happen to us? Sleep. Just the chanting can make a difference. The intonations are there. So Vedic mantras, why I am saying all this is our responsibility as followers of Sanatan Dharma to, if something is a mantra, then it must be chanted in a intonation. If it is a shloka or a stuti, then chant it any tune, no problem. Gayatri is a mantra or a shloka? Mantra. Gita is shloka. So you can put any tune to it. Anushtup Chanda, it is shloka. You can chant. But Gayatri is a mantra. And how we chant Gayatri in a musical way and put it as a doorbell also and put it as a ringtone also with all tabla, peti, harmonium, everything. And today ask any child to chant Gayatri Mantra, he will repeat in that way only, with full music. It should be in a proper intonation. That's the Vedic chanting. And then we will forward messages. See, in France they are chanting, Vedic chanting, Rudram they are chanting. Arey, what about us? We have to chant in our mantra, our culture. So, mantra must be chanted well because it is revelation. It is apaurushaya. So, Veda is apaurushaya. Then Veda is anadi, beginningless. Knowledge does not have a beginning. With creation, knowledge comes into being. With dissolution, knowledge becomes unmanifest. Revelation can happen at different points in time. That is the discovery of that knowledge. But knowledge is beginningless. And knowledge is endless also. Nobody can destroy knowledge. They can destroy books. They can destroy people. All the mediums of knowledge can be destroyed. But knowledge cannot be destroyed. Now, because it is Anadi and Ananta, it does not mean that you and I have no responsibility towards it. A lot of Hindus did that. Veda is Anadi and Ananta. Let as many invaders come and destroy. It will never get destroyed. But today we have 10% of the Veda remaining. Because if the book is destroyed, medium is destroyed, people are destroyed, the knowledge is not available. It may be there in the universe. Are we able to tap? We cannot tap. So when this knowledge is there, such a beautiful knowledge, precious knowledge, and so much effort has gone behind to compile this also, to pass it on generation after generation. It is our duty to preserve that knowledge, to live that knowledge, to propagate that knowledge, to share it. We cannot say let it be destroyed. How does it matter? No. This is our Rishi Rina. So whatever needs to be done for protecting. By the way, a realized master thinks it is the duty of the realized master to protect the Shastra. Then what is you and I? Our responsibility to 100 times more it is. They have finished realizing the knowledge. They are living that knowledge. They have reached the destination. Do they have a need for the map anymore? No, but they still feel Shastra Rakshanam. To protect the Shastra, they feel it is our responsibility. You look at the whole Guru Parampara. Shivanandaji Maharaj, did he not protect the scriptures and share? Taponji Maharaj, even he wandered the Himalayas and everything, but he still wrote, no? Taught the scriptures, produced the Swami Chinmayananda, who then further did so much to protect. It's our duty. Because we have become negligent of that. Anybody can come, talk anything on our scriptures, misinterpret it, insult it, talk any nonsense and make us feel low about it. We are very happy with it. It's okay. Why? Ahimsa. No. That is our duty. To learn, preserve, to propagate is our duty. Because it's such beautiful knowledge. So, Anadi, Ananta, Apaurushaya. We are working on a play on Swami Vidyananda. What a life he lived. A sannyasi, but he protected our scriptures and helped Hakka and Bukka to form the Vidyanagar Empire, which later on became Vijayanagar Empire. And the connection is very beautiful. It was called Vidyanagar because knowledge was given so much importance and so much of glorification and flourishing of the knowledge happened in that place, that because of that knowledge, the people were so strong that they could keep on defeating all the enemies and they were always victorious. So from Vidyanagar, it became Vijayanagar. Vidyaranya was the name of the person, the guru of Hakka and Bukka, who formed that empire, and they dedicated the knowledge, the name of the city to the guru. And later it became Vijayanagar Empire, one of the best empires. So the point here is that Veda is Apaurushaya, Anadi, Ananta, and it has been brought down in the form of book, classified into different parts. Those aspects we will take up in our next class.